What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and episode 4 was as much an illuminating episode as it was an episode that basically told us nothing. At least as far as the bigger picture goes, right? Like, it's obvious they're kind of just building this up and they're gonna have a sort of reveal that comes towards the end. When it comes to this though, if I'm honest, and this is me just being crazy and just throwing a crazy theory out there, I don't know, maybe they're going in the direction of the 7 heavenly cities. At this point, it's anybody's guess, right? Because one of the things to know, for those of you guys who were a little murky about the episode from last week, the nature of the Jinn is that they just come from what's called the Noor dimension in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But that dimension does not exist in the comics. There is no Noor dimension, not like that anyway. And my initial thought when they dropped like the Noor dimension and they were explaining the Jinn and that kind of stuff, my thought was, okay, so maybe the Jinn are like a stand-in for like the Faltine and the Faltinian dimension or something like that. But the difference here is that in Marvel Comics, the Faltine are just ridiculously powerful magic wielders, right? That's what Dormammu is. And his sister Umar, they're Faltines. And so while the MCU may not necessarily follow the direct origin of Dormammu from the comics, I thought, well, maybe they're adapting that to the nature of Ms. Marvel. The problem with that is that none of the Jinn that we've seen are like magic wielders, right? I mean, they kind of are, but not really, right? I mean, they're not on like the level of Doctor Strange or anything along those lines. And anybody who is an occupant of the Faltine dimension, meaning they're native to that dimension, is more than enough to be able to take on Doctor Strange, right? Their ability to wield magic is hitherto unrivaled by virtually any being out there in Marvel Comics, minus like Zom or the Scarlet Witch with the Life Force or something like that. So they're ridiculously powerful. And that doesn't match any of the characters that we've seen in the show, that they literally just seem like individuals or beings who hail from a different dimension. However, martial arts is a key form of how they operate and how they function. And so my thought here was, okay, maybe they're really doing Matt Fraction and Ed Brubaker's 7 Capital Cities of Heaven. Like maybe that's the direction that they're going in. Now, one of the things, and to kind of sidetrack from Ms. Marvel here for a second, the 7 Capital Cities of Heaven was a really cool concept. And in fact, it would fit in very nicely with like Ta Lo from Shang-Chi and this. It would fit in. Actually, it would fit in perfect. So here's the explanation on that, and you guys can kind of give me the skinning on whether or not you would think this, or whether or not you think this would work. So Iron Fist is kind of the linchpin of all that, right? Or at least how it started. And the thing about this is that for like decades in Marvel Comics, when they were writing comic books, for decades, all we had was like Danny Rand the Iron Fist, in the sense that he was a little kid whose dad was basically betrayed and killed. He was taken by the people of Kunlun to the city of Kunlun. Basically, he stayed there, he studied there, eventually learned how to use the Iron Fist, and came back to Earth as a superhero. Done. But this mythology was largely expanded on by Matt Fraction and Ed Brubaker in their Iron Fist run, really more Matt Fraction than Ed Brubaker, but during the Iron Fist run, which was basically the 7 Capital Cities of Heaven and the war, or at least the tournament that's fought by those capital cities. So the way this ended up working, or what we ended up learning, is that Danny Rand is only the most recent Iron Fist, that he is actually just the current one in a long line of people who were Iron Fist. The one before him was Orson Randall, and then there were Iron Fists before him, and before him, and him, and him, and just going back just forever ago, right? Just for huge amounts of time. And so what happens is that every 88 years, the cities basically align. And what it does is it forms those 7 capital cities into one singular city, and then a tournament is fought. And this tournament was quite literally called the Tournament of the Heavenly Cities. So not the most creative name ever, but it was still a pretty cool concept. And so these 7 heavenly cities, again, the phrase cities is I wouldn't say it's a misnomer, it's more just a general term. They were cities, but it was more like realms, right? Dimensions that could only be accessed by those who had the ability to access those particular dimensions. So unless you knew how to access the city of Kunlun, you couldn't just show up there, right? So it's not like, you know, Thor could just be walking through the Himalayas one day and just decide to go to Kunlun. It didn't really work that way. You had to wait until the dimension of Kunlun aligned with the main Marvel universe, and then then once that quote-unquote gateway opened, then you could travel into it. It didn't happen all the time. I think it was something like once every 10 years, but my memory is a little fuzzy. However, what you had were like Kunlun, you had Kunzi, you had Tiger Island, you had the 8th city, which was basically hell. You had like the Undercity, there was Gabo. I mean, there were all kinds of like little cities here, right? Like territories. It's kind of, again, a colloquial name for like dimensions. And so I don't know if that's exactly what they're doing with Miss Marvel. The way that Waleed depicted the dimension, or at least the Nord dimension, and the dimension of the Jinn, is that what you have is, it seems like a plane that's almost the size of Earth. Now, whether or not that's done to scale, I'm not entirely sure, but it looks like it is, right? Like he literally has that map and he's like, here's what our world looks like in comparison to yours. And it basically looked like it was the exact same size. Now, the only way I could see them getting around this is those territories that were there that he showed on the map. Only one of them is the territory of the Jinn. The other ones belong to everybody else, because there are territories that were in like China and places like that. And so wouldn't it be just a nice, neat little thing if what they did here is they basically said the kingdom of Talo and like the realm of the Jinn, so like the Nord dimension and all that kind of stuff, they're all just the 7 capital cities. We haven't seen all of them yet. We've only seen a couple of them, but each one of these individuals basically has a weapon that makes them, the avatar or the representative of that particular realm, effectively making them immortal weapons, because that's what they were called in Matt Fraction's run, right? Like the Tournament of the Heavenly Cities and the 7 capital cities and so on and so forth. The individual representative, so like Danny Rand, the Iron Fist, was referred to as an immortal weapon. We know from like the Miss Marvel TV show that Kamala Khan is just the most recent person to get her hands on that bracelet. Now, it doesn't seem to be a generational thing. It kind of does, but it kind of doesn't. Unless there was something going on with her mom that we don't know about, then it may very well be one of those situations where it's just kind of arbitrary. But at the same time, it does kind of fit the Iron Fist run. And the reason why is because when you look at the character of Orson Randall, who was the Iron Fist before Danny Rand, that Orson Randall refused to fight in the tournament of the 7 capital cities, or the Heavenly Cities. And so because of that, like, I mean, it created all kinds of issues, but you literally just transpose that onto Miss Marvel, and it could just be one of these things where like the option was presented to her mom and she turned it down. Her mom was like, no, I don't want to have anything to do with that. I mean, obviously we do have those little elements of her mom being kind of a rebel, deviating away from tradition, things like that. Like one of the offhanded remarks that's made by, I guess, a friend of the family or whatever her name was when they first got to Karachi, is that she referred to, or she said that Kamala's not a traditional Pakistani name, and that Kamala Khan's mom was always a bit of a rebel. So it's entirely possible that she was just like, no, I don't want to have any part of that, and then literally tried to keep her daughter away from it. She didn't want her daughter to be a part of that either. But now that at least once Kamala Khan comes along and reveals the reality to her mom, she'll be like, yeah, I know all about it. I didn't want you to be a part of this. That's why we moved. That's why we left. Because I didn't want you to be a part of this whole thing, this war between the Jinn and all these individual factions of it, right? You know, I didn't want you to have anything to do with that. So again, like there's a lot of cloak and dagger going on here, right? No pun intended. And I'm not entirely sure what the direction is that they're going in. I mean, truth to tell, I would love it if they were doing like the Tournament of the Heavenly Cities, right? Like the 7 capital cities of heaven. I don't know if I would expect like Shang-Chi to show up in that whole thing, but I still think it's a cool concept. I would say if ever there were a time for them to basically link the bracelet of Kamala Khan with the 10 rings, it would probably be in a post-credit scene at the very end of the show. And I don't know if Kamala Khan would be like yanked in by Wong or something like that, but basically it's sending out a beacon, like some kind of post-credit scene similar to what we saw in Shang-Chi. I don't know if that would be the case or not, but nonetheless, again, I'm just throwing out theories. I have no clue where they're going here. I have no clue. I mean, obviously the main overarching theme here is that if the Bengal is taken, that will lead to literally just the entire second half of the Nord dimension just being conquered, just being totally taken over. So at this point, it's just like a fight for survival. And that presumably these groups have been fighting each other for some time. I mean, we don't know how that barrier got there. It seems like it's always been there, but maybe it was erected as a kind of safety mechanism. I mean, the funny thing about that is it bears a striking resemblance to like Asgard. For those of you guys who don't know, like when Asgard initially came into existence, you had the cold side and the hot side. There was a kind of barrier there that basically kept them separated, and that's how Asgard evolved and grew and changed and so on and so forth. Again, you know, that's Marvel comic stuff. You know, I don't know how that applies to the MCU, but at the end of the day, I will say I would love to see them grab the realm or the Nord dimension and basically roll it over into the Tournament of the Heavenly Cities, right? The Heart of Heaven is really what it's called when all those little cities merge into a singular city where the tournament is held. But I would love to see them bring it in and make it one of the 7 capital cities, because the reality here is that the 7 capital cities of heaven, most of those are of Asian descent, right? Like that seems to be the case. And I guess descent might not be the best word, but are tied into Asian culture. Some of them are not, right? Zagabo is a city, or is one of the capital cities out in Africa. So they're not all tied directly to the Asian continent. Some of them are just sort of out in other places in the world. And that's why I say that's entirely possible with that map, right? That map, as it was shown, or at least as Waleed showed it to Kamala Khan, is more of, these are just one of the dimensions, right? Or at least this is just one of the territories. There's other dimensions out there too, and he doesn't really give her the whole spiel on the other ones. In the same way that you had that map, and if you guys remember in Iron Man 2, when you had Nick Fury talking to Tony Stark, and it was like all the places that S.H.I.E.L.D. is keeping an eye on, one of which was Atlantis with Namor the Submariner, presumably. I don't know who else would be there, but like that kind of a thing, right? So again, I'm not entirely sure. I'm just throwing out an idea here. I mean, technically speaking, I'm running on an hour and a half of sleep, so probably not the best time for me to record this, but you guys get the point. But with that being said, we're going to bring this to an end. Let me know what you guys think. Let me know if you would want to see the Nord dimension, that dimension itself, basically being turned into one of the 7 capital cities of heaven, and basically tying it directly into like the Iron Fist mythos and all that kind of stuff. Obviously, the Iron Fist does exist in Netflix, but literally, if you guys recall, when Kevin Feige was talking about the Netflix cast being rolled over, he was just like, yeah, you know, we're so excited to have Jessica Jones and Luke Cage and Daredevil and no one else, specifically Iron Fist, not him. That guy sucked. So I wouldn't be surprised if what we're looking at here is the early onset of a wholesale reboot of the Iron Fist mythos in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Danny Rand, the whole 9 yards, and that Kamala Khan and all that is simply just one part of it, because I gotta say, that would be cool. So with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this to an end. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.